Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, in this day and age, as we're all living by our screens, it's getting harder and harder to know who your friends are. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with, once more, as always. My name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain on current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and any sort of fun stuff that we can think of. And if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, and we certainly hope that you would, because you're listening to us right now, you can find us basically wherever you find your podcast: Amazon, Google, Spotify, Apple, and you can find every single one of our episodes archived over at our YouTube channel. Plus, we'd really appreciate it if you'd follow us on social media. You can do that at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at either In the Seats or It's Podcast One for all sorts of updates. And finally, and I dare say most importantly, could you pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest movie news, reviews, lists, and basically anything else that we can think of about the moving image, because we got a hardworking team who loves talking about that kind of stuff, and they love it when people read about that stuff, and that's what that's your job. But on this episode, we got a good one. We are diving into some streaming. We are looking at the movie Shook, which is a Shudder original on the service now. And if you don't have Shudder, it is a really good service for horror fans, and it is a measly $4.99 a month. So I do recommend you check it out if you haven't already. And we are talking with writer-director Jen Harrington about the film, which follows Mia, a social media star, who becomes the target of an online terror campaign, and things get a little scary, and she has to resolve this series of games and challenges to prevent people that she cares about getting murdered. And it's this locked-in little thriller, and it's not only sort of a fun ride, but it's a bit of a commentary on sort of how much weight we give social media, and how much weight we shouldn't give it, really. But we talked with Jen about that and so many other things, and it was a fun talk, and I hope you enjoy it, because I certainly know that I did. Now, I mean, obviously, first off, congratulations on the film. I really enjoyed
Thanks.
it. Like,
Oh, I'm glad.
walk me through sort of the inspiration for it, because I mean, it definitely. I mean, there have been social media horror movies before, but this definitely takes more of an intense sort of bent to it, like almost a more personal bent to it, if that sounds right. Like, walk me through the initial sort of idea for the story.
Well, it originated with Alizia Glidewell and the producer Tara Craig. They were actually the ones who came up with the basic concept of focusing it on a social media influencer. And Alizia had worked with a lot of influencers before, was like really familiar with that world. So they came to me with the basic concept, and I didn't know anything about the influencer world at all at the time. So they came to me with the concept and asked me to write this script. So I just sort of dove in to that world and was really like, I felt really old. I was like, I didn't realize. It's funny because it's not that I didn't know they existed, but like, you just have no concept of the magnitude of it. And that, millions and millions of people are in that world, and like just the money and the fame that these people have is on a level that you just kind of don't appreciate if you're not really plugged in to that side of things. So that blew me away. And then, the more I watched these videos, I could see that, how curated these personas are and how obviously created they are. And like, this is clearly not a real person, even though I'm pretending to be very real right now with drinking my, branded coffee or whatever. But it's all so created and scripted. And then you start to wonder, it's like, well, man, like, so that's not really how this person probably is in real life. And then you think about how they have these double lives, double identities, and how confusing and weird that must be. And then And then I just started thinking about how like you have this like fake identity, and this fake identity is friends with someone else's fake identity online, and then you have a fake friendship, and then what does that fake friendship mean? And just exploring, like taking it to the end of this sort of logic of like, okay, so you have these entire fictitious worlds that we put so much meaning into, but like they really don't mean anything in the end. Like we
Mm,
think they mean so much, but like you just pull a little string and remind somebody that like there's this whole real world that you're going to have to deal with, no matter how much you think this online world means everything. it
yeah.
it doesn't, if like you've got somebody chopping your leg off right now. Like that's kind of more like what you need to deal with. So I don't know, I feel like I'm rambling, but just that idea of these two separate worlds. It's We all have it to some degree in social media, but the influencer world, it really is, it's like takes it to this extra level of personas. And then yeah, I think for me it was just kind of playing around with that.
Well, and it's such a weird dynamic too, because you're building an artifice of a world about people who build an artifice of their own world, and then it goes on and it layers and it's layers, and
Yeah.
it's borderline meta, and I mean it really does feel like sort of the whole social media thing does, like there's so much room to play in there, especially in the horror genre, for things to go horribly, horribly wrong. And I mean, I'm kind of curious for you, like as a filmmaker, like how do you want to, like when you're putting something like this together, obviously casting is going to be important because you're making this film that's very much in its own box, and you need to sort of have this world where we're buying into the character who we like, but we don't necessarily like her at first, but then we do like her. It's like it's a weird journey to take us on.
um yeah. I mean, yes,
I
it's
was
like,
rambling for a bit, so that's
no,
fine.
no, I'm like, I'm not sure what the question was.
I'm not
Sorry.
sure either, to be perfectly honest. But I'm curious about casting because I mean, your lead was quite good, and I mean, it's one of those things where when you're writing a movie like this, you have to find the right person to carry it, otherwise, it's not going to work.
Right. Exactly. And it was super, super difficult to find her, actually. We were about a week out from shooting and we still didn't have that role cast, which was incredibly stressful because, everything else was like the wheels were moving. Like we had like a start date, we had location, like everything was ready, but we didn't have like the main character who's in every scene of the movie. And I was really freaking out. And just sort of at that point, we'd seen tons of actresses, had, lots of in person auditions, had tons of actresses self tape and send us their auditions. And I just hadn't found the right person. And I was talking with my DP, Richard Wong, who's super talented. And he's actually a director in his own right. He's amazing. And freaking out. And he's like, I have a friend, my friend's girlfriend is an actress. And I was like, just have her tape, send it. And not thinking anything of it. I mean, at that point I was like asking everyone, like, hey, do you want to be in a movie? Do you want to like record yourself? Let's see if you're any good. And she turned out to be awesome. And it was Daisy. And it was one of those things where the second I watched it, I knew that she was the one, because she has a very she's beautiful, but she doesn't have she has a different kind of beauty. I feel like her face is a little different than like your typical like blonde hair, blue eyed. And so I don't mind, I find her face interesting and I don't mind looking at her face for an hour and a half. And then on top of it all, she has something very sweet and innocent about her just naturally. That I think helps because she is a very unlikable character. And so you need to counteract that with something like, you don't want her to, you want the audience to have to struggle with not liking her. Like, it's like, oh God, she makes the stupidest choices. And like, she's like so self-centered, but there's something about her. There is like an innate sweetness that's there.
Sure, yeah.
That, I think really helps sell it as well. So there were a lot of reasons why she was right for the role, but yeah, I mean, it was really down to the wire.
Did you get a lot of time just to sort of to set it up the character? Because I mean, especially with the material, like you really do have to understand where the story is going to sort of take it in the right way. Because, like you say, she's not very likable, but as the movie goes on, we're slowly getting on her side as the more things unfold, and it's definitely an interesting journey to take us on.
Yeah, I mean, what happened is once we cast her, we just got to work immediately, and we essentially would meet and go like every day, and we would just go through the script and really broke it down as far as every scene, you know, kind of where she was at in this journey, and also just like basic stuff like since it is just her pretty much through the whole movie, is trying to figure out like, okay, this scary thing is happening. How are you going to react to this that's different than that other scary thing that just happened? And are you more scared or less scared? And is this an internal, like, I wonder, or are you like really freaking out? Like we really kind of had to plot and map just her basic emotion level and intensity level and how things were affecting her in a very specific way, because otherwise it would become very repetitive and very one note. And so that's mostly what we spent a lot of time on, was just sort of mapping out her journey through the film so that you could really feel a change and feel like it was always changing in something different and not just sort of the same over and
No,
over
and I
again.
mean the film really does make a strong sort of statement in terms of, I guess, the vacuous nature of, I mean, not just for influencers, just sort of not vacuous, but sort of the manufactured sort of self, imposed image that not only those people put on social media, but we all put on social media, and how not only how easy it is to strip it away, but how invested so many people get into it as well. Like, was that for you sort of the main drive theme of the film that you want to put across?
I mean, I guess for me, yeah, for sure. Like that's definitely part of it. I think for me, what became most important is when I started bringing like the back half of the film, without getting into spoilers and stuff,
Mm,
is bringing in the idea that yes, we all do that, but you can't escape your real life. Your real
right.
life is always there. It's like reality is always going to win out, like originally the title of the film was IRL, in real life. But because it's like I think that we all get so lost in that online world and creating these personas and identities and stuff to some varying degree, obviously influencers to a very extreme
For sure.
degree,
Yeah.
but I mean they still are living in this real tangible functioning world and things are really happening here. And what happens online doesn't matter. Like I said, it's like, if someone in your family is sick, or you lost your job, or you know you're splitting up with your boyfriend or whatever in real life, like those things are what ultimately shape what's happening, not somebody's comment on your Twitter.
No, yeah. And I mean, I mean, I know you can't plan this kind of thing, but it almost feels like the perfect COVID movie, because I mean, it
I
really
know.
one of those things where the world is happening outside, but we're forced inside, and we're forced on our screens, and we're engaging more on our screens. And this really does sort of want to snap you out of it in terms of sort of understanding the context of the screen versus real life, which is really an important thing to put across, and an interesting thing, especially in a horror movie.
Well, it was like obviously we shot this before
Oh,
the
yeah,
pandemic,
yeah, obviously.
and but it has weirdly turned out to be very timely. And I know a few people even have like suggested that we shot it during the pandemic, like which we could have, I guess, because it's just a girl in the house. But yes, it has become incredibly timely as this idea that we're all kind of getting sucked into this screen world
Yeah.
and being forced to make that our reality, but it's still not real.
No, exactly.
As much as we're having to rely on it more and more, it's dangerous because this is still not like in the end, like the things that are happening, in your house with like your roommate that's driving you crazy in your real house is what's going to really affect the fact that she's going to move out and now you've got to cover rent. Not, like, having drinks online, with your, like, it's just, we have to not forget that screens are screens are screens.
Now, I'm always curious because, I mean, especially in this business, I always find that we come to it as fans first. And I mean, I want to know from your perspective, thinking back, was there a movie or like a moment in your life that was sort of the linchpin, sort of the deciding factor to go, you know what, I want to do this. I got to be a storyteller. I got to be a filmmaker.
Oh boy. Well, I have a lot of those. um, but like the one that I think actually connects most to this movie would be Nightmare on Elm Street, actually. I saw
Okay.
it when I was like in the 6th grade and I thought it was the best thing ever. And I became totally obsessed. And just Wes Craven in general. Like I just really got into his whole everything. And you could probably see a lot of it in this film is because he has some humor um to everything he does, that more pop sense of horror that
Yeah.
doesn't take itself too seriously. Um, and I just love that. And for me, I just remember seeing that movie and just thinking it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my whole life. And I'd always been like into telling stories and stuff, but I definitely think that was something where it just so blew me away that I wanted to know everything about it. I wanted to know how they made it. I wanted to know the history of it. I wanted to know how they cast it. Like, I just wanted to know every little detail.
Mhm.
And so for me, I would say, like I said, I have lots of those kinds of movies, but for this, the one I would pick that like fits with this movie would be Nightmare on Elm Street.
And I love that you say that because I can definitely see those similarities. Because I mean, it's well designed and it's beautifully shot, and you're getting bounced between these emotions of being scared but being entertained all at the same time, which especially like doesn't happen in other genres. And I mean, I'm kind of curious from your perspective, what is it about the horror genre that allows filmmakers to sort of play with like a pretty wide canvas, because you can't necessarily do that kind of thing in a straight comedy or in a drama. In a horror, you can kind of do whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think like part of it is because, I mean, honestly, the expectations are so low for horror. I mean, honestly, like people just don't take it very seriously.
Right.
And so I think that that gives you freedom that a lot of other genres don't have. The expectations are just lower. Not to say, okay, wait, let me take that back a little bit. As far as horror fans are very different. I'd say horror fans have huge expectations and are very demanding. But I would say like the general sort of film community and of what you can and can't do to make a good film, I think, you know, horror gets written off a lot. And I think that allows people who are playing with horror to really have fun with it. I also think that, ultimately, what's a horror movie? It's the way we define it as something that's disturbing or scary. Well, that's like perfect to combine with something else because it's like, you know, honestly, it's like when you look at a lot of horror films, if there isn't anything else, it it feels pretty flat and thin. I
Mhm.
mean, you have to infuse it with something else because that's what's going to make it scary is that you care about this person and so it's a romance.
Mhm.
Or what's going to make it scary is I was laughing so much at this one thing and then all of a sudden she got stabbed in the throat and it's so much more shocking because I was just laughing 2 seconds ago.
Right.
So I think the way the horror works best is when it's combined with something else. Um, I think it's just like lends itself very much to the genre. I just answered the question in like 3 different ways. Sorry.
No, no, hey, no, it's not a bad thing. No, but I mean, and that's, I mean, I think that's, you're absolutely right, and it's best that you're on a platform like Shutter because, I mean, a film like this wouldn't necessarily get appreciated anywhere else because it would just get lost in the shuffle. But
Hmm.
because it's somewhere that's curated for horror fans, and horror fans are more open to so many more ideas and creative ideas, and that's a fact. I mean, I think we can look at that and just call that a fact. And it's one of those things where it allows sort of creativity to grow, and I think definitely think this film qualifies in that. And I mean, I'm just to put a bow on all this, I'm kind of curious for you, is horror the genre, or do you just want to be a filmmaker, or like what other stories do you think you have in your wheelhouse? Like where do you want to sort of play going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's like when I was a kid, I was obsessed with horror, and that's all. Like I like methodically made my way through the entire horror section of the video store,
Yeah.
every single horror movie. That was when I was like 10. When I got to be older, I found horror movies terrifying. It was like they didn't scare me at all when I was a kid, and now they scare the crap out of me, and which is funny. But also it's like I've found that I've actually just started to kind of what you said, like I've started to go in a different direction where I maintained horror elements, but I've actually leaned more towards comedy.
Right.
Um, and so, I just sold a script last year to Sony and Jake Kasdan, and that was definitely more comedy,
Mm.
but it has some, sort of extreme violence for laughs and things like
Right.
that in it. And I think like that sort of hybrid is where I'm going now, which is kind of taking it one step further. And it's, the comedy is becoming more of the forefront. And,
Okay, cool.
but there's still those like, I don't know. It's like Shaun of the Dead, right? Like, it's like
Right.
when he throws the record and it sticks in the zombie's head. And it's like, that's just hilarious to me. But it's also like obviously horror. I mean, they just
Yeah.
stuck it in so I think it's like, I'm definitely going more that direction naturally in my storytelling, but we'll see. Right now, that's where I'm kind of lying.
Well, I can't wait to see it because you're right. That is one of the best gags in the movie because it's basically Three Stooges in a zombie movie. So
Yeah.
it's such a perfect blend. And I mean, and just again, congratulations on Shook, which I really
Thank
think is
you.
an interesting little meld of sort of boxed in thriller and social commentary all at the same time. And I hope people watch it. And thanks again for the time. This was great.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you liked it.
All right, thanks, Jen. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.